share this quick video on my channel because I found the subject quite interesting. But yesterday I decided that I'd go back in time to 1975, and I did to all extents and purposes, because in 1975 I would have been 10 years old. Now, as a kid of that age, I was a massive fan of comic books. I read as many as I could get my hands on. I bought a couple a week because I had a paper round, so I was able to afford it. Then I had a friend who lived at the bottom of my street, shout out to Terry Jones there, who had different comic books from me. And what we would do is I'd read my comics, then we'd exchange comics, so I'd get to read his comics, which probably meant that both of us were reading 2 or 3 comics a week, as well as other comics. Now, I read a lot of comic books as a kid, the Marvels and the DCs, of course, which were hugely popular then, but I was always more a fan of British comic books, which were known then as boys' adventure comics, because girls had their own comics back in the dim, distant days of 1975. That may seem at odds with the way we think today, but then boys' comics were full of action and adventure, war stories, westerns, and girls' comics were full of school set stories or cookery stories. But anyway, one of my favourite comics was Battle Picture Weekly, which was a war comic from IPC and Fleetway, I believe they were known at one point. And I have a collection these days of the old comics I used to read as a kid, which I picked up over the years in second-hand shops and charity shops when I come across a few. I've even tracked down a few on eBay. Now, the way I used to read my comics when I was a kid was I had 3 brothers, my mum and dad, of course, and we only had a small house, and the only place I would get peace was in the bath. So it became an habit, which I still keep to this day, of going in a bath, filling up a nice bath with bubble bath. We didn't have bubble bath in those days, so you'd use a bit of washing up liquid to get the bubbles, and laying back in the bath and spending a good half hour lying there while my bottom of my feet went all crinkly and white and ended up looking like a prune. I'd read my comic. So yesterday evening, coming home from work, I still read in the bath to this day. I'll pour myself a glass of whiskey, take it in the bath with me. I'll relax there and I'll read a book. Sometimes I even use my tablet, and believe it or not, I will watch a film in the bath. But last night I happened to, I just recently finished a novel, and I haven't started a new book yet. I've always got something on the go, but so I just reached into my comic pile at random and pulled out this actual issue here, Battle and Valiant Picture Weekly, from the 30th of July 1977. So when I said earlier that I went back in time last night to 1975, I was actually wrong. I overjumped there and I went back to 1977, and I did to some extent because I was laying in a bath with a comic book at the age I am now, just as I did at 12 years of age, and also reading a comic that I could have read when I was 12 years of age. Now, I love Battle. This is one of the earlier battles, because when Battle was at its height and when I was most obsessed with it had merged with Action comic. It was known as Battle Action, but this is Battle Valiant. And the way the publishers used to do it, that when a comic started dropping in sales, they'd merge it into a better selling comic, and the most popular stories sort of from the comic, in instance here Valiant, were carried over to Battle to go alongside the Battle story. In one comic book into another was quite common back in the day. 2000 AD, which is one of the few comics from that period that is still being published weekly today, went through several iterations. It was 2000 AD, 2000 AD and Star-Lord, 2000 AD and Tornado, 2000 AD and Eagle. What would happen was that, as I explained briefly, a comic that was dropping in sales and dropping in popularity, and yet had a few popular characters, would be merged into the better selling comic, and then the best characters would be carried across, or rather the most popular characters would be carried across. And we knew this was happening, comic book readers, when we were a kid, because you'd go, say, to pick up your comic that week, and right across the cover it'd have big news for every reader and a banner across the top of the cover, and we always knew what that big news was. It would either say big news or great news, and basically what it meant was the comic is ceasing to exist as a single entity and is going to be merged into another title. Sometimes it worked, such as Battle and Action. That ran for many years, and that merging was really good. And to some extent, the merger of 2000 AD and Star-Lord didn't affect 2000 AD in a bad way, because it meant that 2000 AD gained the character of Strontium Dog, Johnny Alpha. That was a very good story. It's still a popular character to this day. So sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Battle stories, and I really enjoyed it, you know. It starts off with Joto Beans, which was a story of an American Indian who was fighting in the Second World War. And it would be racist these days in the way that Joe is portrayed. His speech is kind of awkward. Here's a panel here, caption here from the first page, and this is Joe talking. Joe, sick of yellow talk. Next man who make it, he die. So, but you know, it was all action and we didn't look at it in those days. Next thing then, after Joto Beans, we got the Airfix Modelers Club, of which I was a member when I was a kid, with Dick Emery, the TV personality Dick Emery, being the president of the club. Then we had Johnny Red, which is a fondly remembered story from the battle days, and it's hugely popular even now, with reprints of Johnny Red coming out in graphic novel format and selling quite well. Then we have the Battle Stations letters page, which was edited apparently by the character Captain Hurricane. Captain Hurricane, I believed, came from Valiant and not Battle originally. I'm just going to read out a letter here, which came from a reader, to show you the type of things that would be spoken about in these comic books back in the day. So this letter comes from a chap called Andrew Dewar of Killee in Swansea, and for his letter being printed he won 1-24 scale Messerschmitt model kit, and his letter goes: my father's uncle lived near Dover in the war. Once he found an incendiary bomb dropped from a German plane. The bomb had landed in a river though, and when he found it, all the inflammable powder had been dissolved. Now I have it. And considering it is a 32-year-old at the time of writing, and fell from a height of nearly 6,000 feet, it is in very good condition. So I wonder if Andrew Dewar is still out, and I wonder if he still has that bomb. But if he does, best keep it to himself, because these days he'd have the Health and Safety Police cordoning off the entire of Swansea, and armed police arriving at his house. But you know, that's the type of thing that the letter page would feature, with lots of times with letters from readers whose relatives, elder relatives, had actually served in the Second World War, because of course in 1977, the end of the Second World War in 1945 wasn't that far away. The next story is Gaunt in Blitzkrieg, which is another all-action story. There's several other stories in the comic. The Sarge, which was a very, very popular strip, and recently a graphic novel have come out collecting together the Sarge's adventures. Then we had Seawolf. There's also an advertisement here for sweets from the 70s, and I can remember many of these: Candy Tots, Jelly Tots, Fox's Glacier Mints, Smarties, but I don't remember Bunny Tots or Tiger Tots. I do remember Tutti Fruities though, and that's really cool. And this is a competition in which you can win prizes for 2 to 6 year old. There are 25 Raleigh budgie bikes on offer, and a Disney Play Villa. For the 6 to 11 year olds, there's a Chopper 11-inch bike, a few Lego kits, and for older kids, 12 to 15 year old kids, so that would be my category had I entered this competition back in the day. I could have won an Hitachi 3-band radio cassette recorder or a Trafalgar digital watch with 5 functions. So that's just really cool to look at. As I say, there's a story called Seawolf. El Mazzimo is another story. Now interestingly, the creators of these comics wasn't credited in the strip during these days, But this is a very fondly remembered story, not least for the artwork from Carlos Esquira, who became a massive legend in British comic books, going on to write for 2000 AD, and the final story in the magazine is the Bootleg Boy. Now, what I found really interesting in this, there's a section here on this page here, an advertisement there for, look, the first 2000 AD summer special. But there's a section here called Did You Know? And there was a part here that caught my attention. It's this little bit here, and it says, just 4 weeks before D-Day, the Daily Telegraph crossword had the words Omaha and Utah in it. Both were codenames for the landing beaches on D-Day, but subsequent investigation proved it was a coincidence. And I thought, no, surely that was made up at the time. I mean, so I decided to check it. Now, years ago, I've done a lot of research for the books I've written. I know this would have been an arduous task to us to research if that story was true. But these days, it was quite easy, and all I needed was a few little taps upon the keyboard and call up Google, and I found out it was true. Now, listen to this. Now, during the lead up to the D-Day landings, MI5 British counter-espionage services were whiling away their spare moments in May 1944 by doing the Telegraph crossword. They noticed the vital code names that had been adopted to aid the mightiest seaborne assault of all time appeared in the crossword as crossword answers. The answers to one clue turned out to be Utah, and another answer to a clue was Omaha. And these were both names given by the Allies to the beaches where they would land in Normandy. And this, of course, was, oh my God, could the Daily Telegraph crossword compiler actually be spying for the Germans and giving information away? And so MI5 was sent in to investigate that. It was interesting that another answer that appeared in the crossword was Mulberry. And this was the name of the floating harbour that was to be towed across the channel to accommodate the supply ships of the invasion force. Neptune was another answer, not in the same crossword, but in another crossword, another day in the Telegraph. And that was a code name for the naval support to the operation. But the most suspicious of all was a clue about a bigwig, to which the answer was Overlord. Overlord, of course, as most people know, was the overall code name for the D-Day landings. So Google then tells us that alarm bells rang in MI5 because obviously it seemed that the crossword in the Daily Telegraph, that most stalwart of British papers, was being used to tip off the Germans about the forthcoming Normandy invasions. So two officers of MI5 went to Leatherhead in Surrey, where a man called Leonard Dow, who was a crossword compiler, he was a 54-year-old teacher, and the officers demanded to know why he would choose these 5 words with for his crossword solutions. Why not, he asked. Was there a law against choosing whatever words he liked? MI5 eventually became convinced of Dawes' innocence and that it was all a bizarre coincidence. But how crazy is that, isn't it? It's too... it's bizarre. You wouldn't think it was possible for that level of coincidence to actually occur, but it did. And I found that out from reading this old issue of Battle and Valiant and going back in time to 1977 and relaxing in a bath with a great comic. I'm going to do this another day because I really did enjoy reading this comic again, and I don't know, interested me. So, and also it's made me realise that these little did you know things here in the comic, which was quite a regular feature, this column in the comic, was actually true. I assumed they just were made up to fill up inches in the paper. So the fact that Hitler himself helped to design the massive bunkers used to defend the Normandy beaches must also be true. Also, did you know that the 22,000-pound RAF bomb, the Grand Slam, penetrated deep into the earth to set up a miniature earthquake? And did you know that in the First World War, bomb observers from a Zeppelin were followed on a 3,000 feet cable to direct the bombing by telephone? This enabled the airship to stay high above the clouds. Wow, interesting. Boys action adventure comics, brilliant fun, and entertaining too. Now what do you think of that?